Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries Leadership Development Interview Series. My name is Michael Clark. I'm the host of the podcast. I'm joined today by my guest, Grace Lattyak. Grace, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Michael. How are you today?
Doing well. Looking forward to our conversation. I think there's a lot of good things that we're going to unpack and that will be very valuable for our listeners. To get started, for those that don't know Grace, I wanted to give you a quick bio on her, and then we'll get into more of our conversation. So, Grace is a partner at Aon, where she's worked her entire career as a pension actuary. Now, 9 of those years, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but started in Chicago
Sure.
and then did a 6 month stint in the UK,
Yeah,
and then settled in San Francisco, where you've been ever since.
that's right. Yep. I grew up in California. So when an opportunity came up with an Aon where they needed someone at my level in the San Francisco office, I jumped at it. And it's really been a great way to kind of continue with my career progression over the years.
Nice. So it was a going to San Francisco was a coming home for you more than anything.
Exactly.
In addition to her work opportunities there at Aon, she's a member of the American Academy of Actuaries Retirement Practice Council and is the chair of the Pension Committee. She is also a volunteer with the Society of Actuaries. She's the former retirement section chair. You may recall the retirement section used to send out these monthly newsletters, and Grace actually had a written part of that during her time as chair. She
Yeah.
also volunteers with the Actuarial Foundation, so a lot of great volunteer efforts from Grace. Now, some other interesting tidbits about Grace beyond her professional and volunteer um, experience. So, and I'm pulling this from her LinkedIn profile. She says, I also enjoy knitting, endurance sports that don't require hand-eye coordination and travel. I don't think I've ever had anybody articulate a knitting hobby before. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I started knitting when I was in college. My aunt knits and she taught me how to do it. And I'm very bad at just like sitting in front of the TV and not doing anything. So knitting's a great thing to kind of do while I'm trying to relax and have some downtime. And it's also a good kind of complementary hobby to going outdoors and doing things that tire me out. So I've made blankets and sweaters and lots of scarves over the years.
All right. What's the thing that maybe you're most proud of that you've knit so far?
Probably a sweater, because sweaters, I have a lot of trouble making the size what I intend them to be. So that's the most challenging. And so when I've gotten that right, that's probably what I'm most proud of.
I can understand that. That seems complicated. Okay, but now how do you marry up something like knitting that does require some hand-eye coordination, along with your comment about enjoying endurance sports that don't require hand-eye coordination?
Yeah, well, when I was a kid, I definitely could not do any of the sports that like basketball or volleyball or baseball or anything that those just couldn't connect to the ball. But I grew up swimming, and as an adult, I've kind of gotten more into running, done a few marathons, although those have been a while back now. But still enjoy getting out onto the trails here in Marin County. We have some great places to go for trail runs or hikes. Still swim occasionally, but those are things that don't require a ton of coordination.
And then you mentioned travel. Where have been some of your favorite places to go?
Yeah, so I have been to all the continents except for Antarctica because I'm a little bit terrified of that boat ride over there. Lately, some of my favorite trips have been I went to Thailand for the first time last year, and that was amazing. It was so easy to get around. The food was amazing. The people were super nice. Um, I also went to Tanzania to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in the past and did a safari. The safari was like one of the highlights of my travel over the years. And I've been really lucky also to have family who's lived in Europe. So at one point, my cousin lived in Spain, my aunt lives in Belgium. And so I've had opportunities to kind of go to some of those places regularly, in addition to kind of having that connection to when I worked in the UK for 6 months.
That's awesome. Well, in addition to those items that are on Grace's LinkedIn profile, a couple of other things that you might not know about her. So she, in addition to volunteering for the profession, she volunteers where she lives. On weekends, she volunteers with the National Park Service's Habitat Restoration Team. Talk to us a little bit about that.
A few years ago, when I moved up to Marin, I was looking for some volunteer things that would kind of revolve around, what I like to do in terms of like enjoying the trails out there. And I found this habitat restoration team. And basically, what we do is go out and either pull invasive weeds from the areas of the Marin headlands, or we are planting native plants. And so I've been doing it for a couple of years now, and it has been really interesting to kind of see how the work that we've done just over a year, kind of you see it pull together and what the impact on the landscape is. So it's fun. It's a good way to just spend a Sunday outside all day and get some physical labor in, which is, unlike what I do the rest of my week.
No, that's great. Like I said, a couple of interesting things there that I don't think I've had another guest say before. So I think all that is awesome. And then last but not least, your aunt is a retired pension actuary. Is that how you got into the pension world to begin with?
She's a retired pension actuary from Watson Wyatt, and did she didn't really push me to become an actuary, but she was a resource for me. I actually first really learned about being an actuary from my calculus teacher in high school who had been an actuary. And I think one of those tests that you take in high school that says what jobs you should do,
Hmm.
actuary was on that list. And so she was a great resource as I was kind of considering it. Um, and she was also really helpful in terms of when I was thinking, what kind of area of actuarial science would I want to go into? She obviously had the consulting mindset there, and she thought that I would be a good fit for consulting as well, which it turns out was true. So I really appreciated, her being able to use her experience and wisdom and knowing me to help guide me to where I am.
Interesting. So one of those people that knew they wanted to be an actuary in high school.
Yes, I am. And I went to Drake. So I specifically looked out for a school that had a strong actuarial program. I did kind of think, like, oh, maybe if I don't like actuarial science, I could go into engineering at some point, but I never changed. So it stuck.
That's awesome. That is great. Well, let's talk a little bit more about your just career journey in general. So you've been at the same company your entire career, which is rare these days. What led you to Aon in the first place, and maybe more importantly, what's kept you there?
Yeah. So when I was interviewing with companies in college, I don't think I really had a strong preference in terms of like, do I want to be a healthcare or PNC or life or retirement actuary? I was at that time really looking for a company that had a good reputation, a company that seemed like it supported its actuaries, and a place where I connected with some of the people at the company because I think I realized that there was going to be a big learning curve from college to working. And I'm not the type of person who can take like a lot of, at least back then, like a lot of like criticism or, I needed someone to be nice to me as I was learning. And the people, at Hewitt at that time were very, very nice. And I just felt very comfortable with them. Like I could make mistakes and it would be okay. And that would be part of the learning process. So honestly, I think the number one thing was kind of the connection with the people.
That's great. Well, so you mentioned, I'll dig a little bit deeper here. So when you started, did you start with Hewitt
Yes,
then?
I did.
Okay, started with Hewitt. So for those that don't know, Aon acquired Hewitt. Oh man, how many years ago now? It's been a while.
Yeah,
Um,
12 or 13, I think, or
yeah.
maybe no more than that.
So
Yeah.
you've gone through that process of you were at one company that got acquired by another company. Uh, any lessons learned from that, from your perspective when you look back on it now?
Yeah, so I think it was honestly, like, I think it was beneficial for me, the acquisition, because being with the same company for my whole career, there's some people who come in and out, but it gave me the opportunity to meet and learn from people who kind of grew up in a different actuarial organization, and there was a bit of a different culture, I guess, between Hewitt and Aon. And I think I appreciated how that melded together. And I think ultimately, in my perspective, like the organization kind of took the best of both worlds in the retirement space. It also kind of the merger coincided with my move to San Francisco. And so when I was in Chicago, the merger had happened, but we hadn't combined offices yet. So we're still kind of generally operating separately. And then shortly after I moved to San Francisco, they combined. But when I moved to San Francisco, since the smaller offices, they were already combined, working as one team, working across clients and everything. So I almost got to miss any kind of like transition. And so I think I experienced more of the differences of moving from a big headquarters type office like Chicago
Hmm.
to a smaller regional office like San Francisco. That was probably more of the change that I experienced.
No, that's really interesting. So, again, like I mentioned, it's fairly rare to find someone that's worked their entire career so far at one company. What advice would you have for any entry-level actuaries on finding a company where they can potentially have a similar experience, where they can, for somebody that wants to say, hey, I want to make my home somewhere. What advice would you have for them in terms of what do you look for? What questions do you ask?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, I think primarily I go back to the people that you're working with because you're working with your team for 8+ hours a day. That's a lot of time spent with your colleagues, and to the extent that you can get along with them and learn from each other. Looking for smart people that you drive with, I think, is can be really beneficial. But then also, I think what I maybe did inherently, but maybe didn't realize I was doing explicitly was trying to understand the broader culture of the company. And I think you get some of that just through the people that you're meeting in the interview process. But these days, I do think that companies tend to be more explicit in terms of their their culture and what the values of their company are. You can look for that sort of thing on their website. Like, do they provide volunteer days off and things like that, if that's important to you. Um, and then I think also just understanding the plan for growth of the company. I do think I was smart enough at the point where I was interviewing to ask some questions about like what's happening with the retirement system. And you hear about retirement plans going away. And by the way, that was 22 years ago, and I still still happily
Still here.
employed
Yeah.
doing retirement plan work. And I I remember some pretty good answers. And what I tell people these days is like the retirement system isn't going away anytime soon. Whether if it looks maybe it looks very different than it did before, but to me that's exciting. And I think if, for example, if you want to be a retirement plan actuary, I think you have to be flexible and be willing to accept that your job isn't going to look the same today as it um, will in 5, 10 years. And maybe there's some other, if you're looking for something that's more stable or more kind of like modeling intensive, yeah, then maybe the retirement world isn't kind of the perfect fit. So I think that's also something to for people coming into the workforce to think about.
Specifically as it relates to just the retirement plan actuary role, because that's it's the world that I play in as well. So I've given this some thought as well. But let's say if everything dried up tomorrow and there was no need for a pension actuary, what do you feel like the skills that you've gained translate into other things that you could successfully make a career at?
For sure. Well, I mean, I think if you're even narrowed into retirement, I think there's a ton of stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
life insurers now are big in the pension risk transfer space, and they have a need for people to who understand pension type benefits and how those are run. So from like the very specific technical space.
Hmm.
And then I think lifetime income is just going to be more and more of a topic in the future. I think it has to be. But then beyond retirement specifically, I have gotten involved in a lot of things that have broadened my view beyond just retirement over my career. Getting involved with broad benefits benchmarking, for example, helping companies think about things from a total rewards perspective. And I think the reason why me and others have been able to expand into that is because we're good at looking at a lot of data points and distilling that into a message that matters, what a strategy could be to address that. And I think those are some of the actuarial skills that translate into broader support for how employers kind of can run their businesses efficiently, engage with employees, et cetera.
No, I love that. I think those are all, I agree with you too. In fact, you probably given me some additional insights there as well. Yeah, but I would agree with you. I think especially the lifetime income piece of things, there's going to be more and more work for retirement actuaries to do that probably doesn't look traditional in terms of what we're doing and now. But there will definitely be a place for it. And like you said, that could be within a retirement consulting firm, but it may be within an insurance company and looking at products and design and the different things to evaluate there. But having that, especially in you and I do a lot in the corporate plan space, like understanding what that looks like in a qualified retirement plan, um, there's going to be a need for that skill for
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's pivot a little bit and let's talk about some of your volunteer work. As we mentioned in your bio, there's a lot that you have done and do. But let's start with the roles that you've had at the Society of Actuaries, where you've been involved with the pension section, with now the retirement section. Um, but I don't think that's where you got your start with them, if I remember right. Was it the Committee on Post-Retirement Risk and Needs?
So I was lucky enough to be working with Carol Bogosian, who was part of this committee. She introduced me to Anna Rappaport, and at the time, Carol and I were working on retirement readiness an analysis at Aon. And it was kind of a key part of what the Committee on Post-Retirement Needs and Risks at the SOA was thinking about as well. And so it gave me some exposure to what volunteering could look like that wasn't exam grading. And I know that's like a super important part of volunteering, but it was never going to be the thing that I was going to get excited about. And this was like, oh, I love this. So I was able to join that committee and work on some project oversight groups to kind of get the sense of like, how I could contribute my expertise to research and to work product that the SOA put out that can help, you know, individuals.
Now, so from there, you did obviously then volunteer with the SOA's retirement section, where I mentioned you were chair for a year. Talk about that experience, just what it was like to be on that or volunteer in that particular way, both being on the section council as well as leading that council.
And as I think back to that, I remember at the close of when I was the chair of that, I wrote an article for the retirement section newsletter that talked about the imposter syndrome that I had joining that committee because I don't even remember how many years of experience I had, but probably a little less than average for serving on that committee. And I didn't feel like I was the most technical actuary or anything like that. But what I learned by serving on that committee is everyone has something to offer, some sort of expertise, and you don't actually want everyone to be like the most technical actuary in one space. You want a broad view of expertise. Some people who are, maybe better at communicating topics, some people who really understand the nitty-gritty of things. And so that opened my mind to like the different ways that could contribute to the organizations. Um, it also gave me an opportunity to meet a lot of really smart people with different opinions about things, get some different perspectives. And I was getting to, like you said, I never switched companies. So, up until that point, I had some limited exposure to other retirement actuaries, and especially like in a professional context.
Mm.
So it was helpful to get some sense of like what other people are thinking and how they're thinking. And then, being the leader of that committee was a great opportunity to kind of hone some leadership skills earlier than I might have like in my day job, and to again meet other people, um, and join some projects and and the SOA also gave us like some training on leadership. So just from a professional development perspective, it was great as well.
No, I think that's really interesting. And if we can go back to the reference you made to the retirement section news and that imposter syndrome article, I actually do remember that vaguely. I don't remember the details, but I do remember it being there. Um, how have you had to deal with imposter syndrome as you've worked your way through some of these volunteer roles, as maybe even in leadership roles in your job with Aon as well?
Yeah, I mean, I just thinking back to like when I first started at Aon, I was terrified to pick up the phone. Now I spend all of my time talking to people, I feel like. And so it it's been a lot about putting myself in uncomfortable positions, maybe sometimes coming in over prepared, but putting in the effort to come into situations prepared, knowing knowing that maybe I'm going to be leading a group of people who are way more senior than me, but understanding that I have like they put me into this position for a reason. There's respect for what I bring to the table, and I think I've been really lucky too to have a lot of people behind me, supporting me through the years. Like Rob Rice Cattell, for example, he was the person who got me to speak at the first CCA meeting, which was really the start of anything I've done volunteer wise, over the years. And he believed in me that I could do a good job. And many others at Aon and within the volunteer organizations have helped um, to instill that perspective that I am, worthy of being there. I have something to add. And so one of the things I've tried to take away from that too is kind of passing that down and trying to lift others up, so that they have the confidence to take on roles that maybe they're a little uncomfortable with. But honestly, that's how you grow.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. It is a hard thing to deal with, right? And especially when you don't feel as qualified or prepared or as smart as the other people that you're going to be working with. But I think that's one of the beauties of volunteering. Like you mentioned, you get to work with a lot of smart people,
Mm,
but they're all there as volunteers, right? So everybody's got the for the most part, I think they're all rowing in the same direction in that and so it and I like how you also articulated too. Everybody brings a different skill set to the table. You don't want everybody to have the same skills. You want that variety, you want that diversity. That's how you can actually make things happen and make it meaningful.
absolutely.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your Academy volunteer work. So you're currently serving as the chair of the Academy's pension committee and chair of the research committee. Talk to us a little bit about the pension committee. What's that committee's mandate within the academy structure?
So the pension committee sits under the Retirement Practice Council that kind of handles all things retirement from Social Security to public multi. The pension committee tends to be around to provide unbiased, objective advice, analysis of either public policy proposals or helping actuaries understand the practical aspects of complying with ASOPs. So we will write a lot of issue briefs around kind of topics that might either be in the discussion around legislation or regulation, and we'll have conversations with policymakers or people that work for agencies to help them understand the actuarial aspects of those issues, and at the same time trying to support our members, actuaries, to make sure that they're able to apply all of this, the rules, to their everyday work.
So, and maybe help illustrate this a little bit better for people that might not understand the academy structure. So you mentioned the Retirement Practice Council. The pension committee sits underneath that. How do you interact with the other committees that all fall underneath that Retirement Practice Council umbrella?
So the pension committee primarily focuses on single employer corporate plans, but if there's anything that is kind of cross practice, we tend to own that. So for example, like the we're writing a practice note on ASOP 4, and and so we're coordinating very much with the public sector and the multi-employer committees. So we have kind of a cross committee working group who has worked on that practice note. Um, and and there's, obviously a number of issues that go across anything around mortality or, even setting expected rate of return. Those sorts of issues are going to be cross practice. And so, we meet regularly to make sure that we're coordinated and have that overall perspective, so that, some things are necessarily going to be more corporate focused, but if it doesn't need to be, then we'll want to bring in those other perspectives as well.
So I'd love for you to compare and contrast for us these two different organizations that you volunteered for, right? The SOA is more in the roles that you've played there have been more research focused. The Academy obviously is more of a public policy angle to it. Not saying that there's not crossover and overlap between those. The CCA, which we haven't mentioned this, you volunteered on the CCA's webinar committee for a number of years. So you've had your hands in a few of these different organizations in different roles. Compare and contrast what you've gained from the different opportunities that you've had volunteering in these different organizations.
I feel like all of them, I've gained a lot in terms of the getting to know other actuaries and getting deeper on specific topics. So I think for side of actuaries, for example, the focus was really on a lot of the work that I helped out with. It was around kind of like retirement readiness, individual focused research, and being on project oversight groups for that. So I got a lot deeper in some of those topics when I was there. When I joined the academy, I one of the first projects I volunteered to lead was on ASOP 51, and a practice note around that. And so that got me really deep into the ASOPs and how you read all of the specific nuances of the language in ASOPs, that I hadn't really ever gotten involved in. And that led to, at Aon, now I'm the one who tends to give internal trainings on professionalism standards because I have gotten very deep into that. And then from the CCA perspective, it was great to just get to brainstorm with people around what topics do actuaries need to get smarter on, and you get more perspectives around what are the hot topics of the day. And so that was almost like a broader view of what's everyone thinking about. That's more from like a content perspective,
Mhm.
where I think that's the major difference in the volunteering is like what specific content that I would work on. I think it's similar from a personal development, leadership development, relationship development across all organizations. That's all just been extremely positive for me, working across and in connecting with people through all of those organizations.
No, I love that. That's great. So obviously you're successful in your day job. You spend time volunteering. Why do you volunteer?
Um, so I think so. I think it's a good question, and it's almost hard to articulate, as you can tell, because it almost just feels like part of my what I think is important to do my job as a whole. Um, and maybe I'll say, maybe taking a step back. When I was in college, one of the speeches I did for my like rhetoric class was on Social Security. So I have long, even before I ever knew I was going to be a retirement actuary, I have been concerned with the retirement systems of this country. And I do think that the desire to kind of give back beyond like kind of my corporate day job to the retirement system as a whole has been a really driving factor for me. I mean, certainly the work I did with Society of Actuaries was directly related to that. Like, how can individuals manage their risks better? Um, and then I also have been really interested in getting more involved with retirement policy generally. And, the academy has been a great place for me to expand my understanding of how things work and why rules are the way they are.
Hmm.
One of the papers that we put out last year was a kind of look back at ERISA over the last 50 years. And I learned so much. And I think being able to have that context of why things are the way they are can help you to understand how you might affect change in the future. And and that broad ability to help to impact the retirement system, hopefully for the good, beyond working with individual employers.
Hmm.
Maybe that's kind of like the underlying why of what I do, but I also just enjoy it. So maybe that's the more simple answer beyond my like lofty, wanting to help the retirement system.
Yeah, no, but you are right. It is fun. And anyone that hasn't had the opportunity to volunteer in any of these actuarial organizations, obviously we've listed a few here, and there's more out there, but there is plenty of fun to be had for all the reasons that you've listed too. It's intellectually stimulating, the networking that you get to do, the new thoughts, the ideas. Uh, but it also does, and you've alluded to this as well, it actually makes you better at your day job. At least that's what
Mhm.
I've found, and I think I've
Absolutely.
heard you allude to this as well. Whether that's training on professionalism internally, but just having a knowledge base or having the connections to know that when things come up, that you can be a good connector of people and thoughts and ideas, which is can be very valuable.
Mhm. Absolutely.
So for people that for actuaries that maybe haven't dipped their toe in the water yet in terms of volunteering, what advice do you have? How should they think about this? How should they get started? What would you say to somebody?
I mean, I would say just do it. You can start in a really small capacity, just working on kind of one project. And if you don't know someone who's already volunteering, I think that's probably the best way is like talk to someone you know at your company or, in your network that you know who's volunteering,
Mhm.
ask them where there might be a good place for you to get involved. Um, if not, you can go to any of like the organization's websites. I know the Academy's call for volunteers is out, but honestly, you can just reach out to any Academy member at any time and say, "Hey, I'm interested," and we'd be happy to talk. And I know all the other organizations are like that as well, because you don't have to be an elected member. Like for the SOA retirement section, for example, it took me 2 times to get elected to serve on that committee. And so in the meantime, I was, busy working on some post-retirement needs and risks work, and that was great. And I would also say that once you do start volunteering, be an active volunteer because you're going to get way more out of it. I know it's like very cliche to say, but the more you put in, the more you're going to get out of it. It's cliche for a reason.
Yeah, no, I love some of those things, and I've had those experiences as well. And I think you definitely get a lot out of volunteering and trying new things. And I'll say, and I don't know if you've had this experience, like there have been some things that I volunteered for that as soon as I get into them a little bit, I realize, oh, actually isn't for me.
Uh,
And the nice thing about it is it's like it's not like you're on the hook for anything, right? You can say, actually, you know what, now that we've gotten into this and give it a good shot, but 6 to 12 months in, if you're like, I don't, this is not something that's got me energized, you can walk away. It's pretty easy.
yeah. And also, if you've done something for a number of years and you feel like it's time to move on and do something else to get some new
Hmm.
experiences, you don't have to be like, you don't have to stay in the same role forever. And what I
Hmm.
would recommend is that you find your replacement and then everyone will be very happy with you. So that's my, and as like the chair of the pension committee, I love it when, someone's rolling off and they find their replacement. Because I know it's someone who comes highly recommended, will be an active volunteer,
Hmm.
and then I'll have to go, searching for someone I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the other common misconception, you mentioned this at the beginning when we started talking about this, how I think coming out, especially for someone taking exams, when they finish exams, the most volunteer type stuff that they've generally been exposed to is people at the SOA that write and grade exams. And there is so much more out there. Not to say that if someone's interested in that, they should absolutely pursue it. They should absolutely volunteer. But there are so many opportunities within the professional associations to gain experience and to deepen your knowledge that go beyond just exams and grading.
Absolutely.
So let's talk for a little bit here to wrap up our conversation about leadership. In thinking about people that you consider to be successful leaders, what traits do they have? How do they demonstrate that leadership from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that one of the traits that I found I really admired of leaders is when they really listen to their teams and maybe do less talking and more listening, and then are able to kind of take all of that information and make a decision. Because ultimately, I think the leader needs to take the responsibility for making a decision, but should be taking into account all of what their team, who are likely deeper into kind of some of the specifics, are
Mhm.
saying. But also maybe have to make the hard trade-offs if there are things that don't all converge together nicely. So when I think of leaders that I admire a lot, one of the traits that I've noticed, or you hear stories about the leader when you walk into a room and you have a meeting with them and you feel like you are the only thing on their mind. They are paying extreme attention to you, taking everything what you're saying very seriously. Um, and you walk out of that room feeling like you were heard, you were respected, and I think that puts then a lot of respect back onto that leader.
Mhm.
And also, I think, being in the leadership perspective, if you're really paying attention to what that person is saying, then you're able to kind of like take that in a lot better than if, you're multitasking or whatever, even though, that leader is clearly very, very, very busy, has lots of other things to do, having that ability to really focus on what's being said to them. So those are just a couple of examples.
No, I love that. Let me see if I can reiterate them back to you.
Uh,
One of them would be just a listener that can synthesize information into decision making, which is that is definitely a skill. It's hard sometimes not to come in with preconceived notions, but the person that's willing to go out there and listen to perspectives, and it doesn't mean they have to agree with it, but it at least opens up their eyes. They can ask. They're maybe it's said another way. They're comfortable asking the question, "Hey, what am I missing? Yeah,
mhm,
what's there that I've got my thoughts, I've got my ideas. Tell me help me understand where I'm blind and that I'm not
mhm,
seeing everything." So I love that. And then someone that can make their people feel seen and heard, right?
mhm,
That they really do know them. The people that are working with them feel like, hey, this is a person that actually cares.
mhm.
I love that. So when you think about people, who are your role models when it comes to leadership, and how have you tried to emulate their examples?
Yeah, well, one is actually my dad. So he led a team when he was still working. He's retired now, but he would talk a lot to me about some of the things that he prioritized as being a leader, which has been helpful for me as I've kind of stepped into that role. Um, One of which is bringing your people along for the successes, but being willing to kind of stand in front of them for the failures. And just really like having the back of your team essentially. So promoting them when there's the successes, but kind of trying to shield them as much as possible. Um, And then the other thing that has always resonated with me from what he's talked about is setting clear expectations and making sure that the consequences align, like either positive or negative, align with those expectations so that you're consistent in terms of if people are meeting or not meeting
Hmm.
the expectations that you set. But you can't do that if you haven't clearly set those expectations in the first place.
Yeah, I love that one. That one's one of the things that I care a lot about is managing expectations, and I think you've articulated that well. So what do you when you think about our profession, right? What do actuaries who are going to be future leaders, what skills do they need to be successful within our profession?
I think that we need leaders who are flexible and willing to make decisions, to make changes, and to adapt to those changes themselves. Because with everything going on, and like retirement aside, there's AI that's going to, in theory, like change a lot of how work gets done, um, and other things that we haven't even thought of. Like I just think back to when I first started, and I mean, it's not really a leadership example, but laptops weren't a thing, and now, uh, and now, we're hybrid working. I can't imagine what COVID would have been like without laptops. And so in my career of 20, a little over 20 years, there's been a lot of changes, and I think that that's just going to continue to accelerate in the future. So like flexibility, willingness to change, and then the other area that I think is important is, and you touched on this a little bit, just like the connections to others and building connections for people. The leader of Aon's North American Wealth Practice, Jennifer Brasher, whenever you sit down in a meeting with her, like the first thing she asks is like, what can I do for you? Can I connect you with some of these people? You talk about an issue you're having. She says, okay, here's like the three people I'm going to connect you with to get that moving. And I think that is a way to make sure that like all aspects of issues are considered by having those broad connections. And I think that's just even more important in the increasingly like complex work that we're doing every day as actuaries.
No, those are all really good points and wholeheartedly agree with them. I'm going to ask you one other question here that I probably didn't prep you for, and that's okay. But I'm noticing in the back there you've got a bookshelf and it's got a bunch of books on it. So, what are you currently reading or listening to that's got you excited?
Oh, well, I use a Kindle, so I never know the titles of books that I'm reading. Um, but I kind of read anything from like fantasy to rom-coms. And I read this weird book recently called Landline, that was kind of a sci-fi rom-com. So it was interesting. But I'm also a huge like podcast person. And my podcast list is basically combined of running podcasts, news, and so like things like Planet Money and stuff like that, which I feel like are super helpful to hearing things. Bad reality TV recap shows. And so depending on what mood I'm in, I can select the appropriate podcast. So
You've got options, it sounds like.
yes.
I love it. I love it. That's great. Well, Grace, I want to thank you for joining us today. I think our listeners will get a lot out of our discussion. I mean, thinking about working at one company for your entire career and just looking at that culture fit, the people fit, all of that, I think is some really sound advice. And then your thoughts on leadership as well, like being a good listener, helping people feel heard and seen. And I like what you said about your role models too, about your dad, about bringing people along for the successes, standing in front of them to help shield them from some of the failures, managing expectations, flexibility, building connections, all of those things. So I think there's a lot to be gained here. So thanks for all you do, especially within the profession. You're obviously highly involved and doing some good work there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So Grace, if people want to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, my email is grace.lattyak, Lattyak at aon.com. So feel free to email me. And I'm also on, LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me there.
And you can easily find Grace at a lot of the professional association meetings, given not a surprise given her volunteer roles there. So again, Grace, thanks for joining us. I want to encourage everyone to subscribe and like this podcast to help us share stories like Grace's that can help benefit the actuarial community. A reminder, the leadership development community of the CCA is open to any actuary. You can reach out to the CCA to join. I want to thank Shannon Peterson of CCA staff for helping to produce today's event. Join us for upcoming CCA events and follow us online on social media and on our website. Thanks again, Grace, and thanks everyone for tuning in.